Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Author in Residence series on Exit Path, How to Win the Startup Endgame with Touraj Parang. My name is Colin May, and I'm a Director of Programs at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As you may have just seen in the chat, the NASDAQ Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs called Mentor Makers. You can create your own advisory board to guide and inspire you with in-the-moment mentorship from topic experts and professionals dedicated to providing exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So find or become a mentor today by using the link in the chat. Mentorship matters to all entrepreneurs. Their success is dependent on it. Quick housekeeping, we're going to open up for live Q&A near the end of the event, so please submit your questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. Try to get to them all. Now, none of what we do here at the center could be possible without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, and HubSpot. We're grateful and humbled by their contributions. Now, during these still, in many ways, unique times, we're curious on how sentiment is among the entrepreneurs that we work with. So I'm going to launch a quick poll just to let us know how you're feeling about your business right now. Can't believe we are this near almost nearing the end of the year. Hopefully all of you were doing well, but we use this information to increase or decrease the wellness programs that we provide for our entrepreneurs. So thank you all for voting. I'm going to end this poll in a moment, share those results. Looks like optimism is in the lead, but totally understand there's some survival mode, anxiety, and a little bit of fear out there. So hopefully our presentation today will help alleviate some of those sentiments. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome in the chat to our special guest today, Touraj Parang. He's a Silicon Valley insider, president and CEO of Serve Robotics, and author of Exit Path, How to Win the Startup Endgame. Touraj, welcome.
Thank you, Colin. Great to be here.
I am so excited for this conversation, and what a topic to talk about, exit. So we're going to jump right in.
Wonderful. So I was actually delighted to see the optimism in the room. So that's fantastic to see.
I love it. Yes. And totally understand it's the entrepreneurial journey that you know all too well, that there's some of that anxiety and survival mode out there. But hopefully this conversation today and the other programs that we host will help. So jumping right in, what's wrong with the typical definition of success for a startup?
Oh, great question. Well, a lot of times when people talk about success, they're just looking at the metrics, and the number one metric is somewhat the valuation, and getting a big valuation or raising another round of financing. But to me, I believe that kind of misses the point a bit of entrepreneurship, which is actually when you start a company, you start with an idea, you're passionate about a mission. And so, I think we need to keep reminding ourselves that the mission is always comes first, and do things that are aligned with better furthering that mission. So mission over metrics is what I would say.
I love that. And so Exit Path is all around the acquisitions market, and many have said that most acquisitions fail. But if not, what fuels this misperception?
I think that is a misperception. In fact, I know it is because I've actually done some digging and research, and I cover that in my book. But it is a myth. Of course, in the media, failure stories are what grabs attention, right? When you hear about billions of dollars wasted, the AOL Time Warner debacle, and others, there are many stories of colossal blunders in mergers and acquisitions. So there's no shortage of those. But for every one of those, there are many more that are successful, and no one bothers to write about them. I would take the best proxy for that to be the number of deals that actually get done every year. There are more than 45,000 M&A deals that get done every year. That's 30 times as much as IPOs, by the way. And also that when you do surveys of people who have actually done M&A deals, like the practitioners in the field, and you ask them, hey, were these deals successful or not? The majority of them say that they are, and they continue doing it. So they're not crazy, these companies that keep acquiring, they see a benefit in it.
Yep. And what firsthand experience taught you the hard way of why exit plans are super necessary?
Gosh, so that takes us back to 2005 with my first startup. Now, I've been around the block since the late 90s in Silicon Valley, starting companies, and both on the founder side, I've also been a lawyer, I've been a VC, I've also been an acquirer. So I've kind of worn multiple hats. But this story that really drove this point home for me, the importance of creating an exit strategy, was with my first startup. So I was a new entrepreneur, first-time entrepreneur. In 2005, I started a company called Jackster, which was trying to bring to mobile phones what Skype was doing for desktop computers, which was free communications anywhere in the world, texting or voice calls. At that time, mobile calls were so expensive, students couldn't even call back home because they would go bankrupt. You would pay per text message. So these are the pre-iPhone days. Some in the audience may remember those days, prehistoric pre-iPhone days. And what we did was bridge basically the internet with the telephony network and bypass some of those toll charges. So not surprisingly, we grew very fast. We weren't the only one. There were like 3-4 other companies that were doing the same thing, but all of us got massive traction. We went from 0 to 10 million users within the first year of launching the product. VCs were chasing us down the street. We had all the top tier investors, investing in us. So we were happy. I would say perhaps a little bit arrogant, and we decided that, look, we have it made. We have a startup that's going to go to IPO, and we don't need to worry about partnerships or courting potential acquirers, even thinking about an exit strategy. Who needs that? We have a big billion-dollar company here. Let's focus on what we are doing. Lo and behold, we hit the 2008-2009 downturn. All of a sudden, VC money dried up. I think for a lot of us, today is very similar to what happened back then. There was a big market crash and recession. We call it the Great Recession. We were scrambling. We had only less than a year of runway left, and we didn't know what to do. We tried to tweak the product, figure out monetization. Our mantra was grow, 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 but now it was like money, money, money. But we hadn't really had the chance to optimize those funnels and run those A/B tests to acquire customers profitably. 6 months passed, and now we have less than 6 months of runway, and we're like, oh no, we better sell our company then. That's the only chance for recouping any benefit from this past 4 years of blood, sweat, and tears. Unfortunately, that was too late. What I've come to now realize, having gone through that experience and many others on the acquirer side and the seller side, is that these acquisitions take a long time, especially acquisitions that are meaningful, right? They're strategic. The acquirers pay a premium. There's actually value created. Those take a long time, and a year or more. So we didn't have that, and we had one buyer who basically dictated their terms, and we barely made pennies on the dollar, or us and our investors. So it was a loss for all intents and purposes. I took 6 months to just lick my wounds and figure out what happened. And I realized that one key strategic mistake we made was the fact that we decided not to build those bridges with a partner ecosystem and not go out there. And just we were left out. All those competitors I mentioned that started in the same year, they all had massive acquisitions. And they were able to create those bridges, or partnerships. They were growing through partnerships. We were the only one that was really viral, but it turned out to be to their advantage. Even though I feel, maybe I'm biased here, but they had inferior products. And I thought we had the best team, best product. We won the most awards. We had raised the most money. Very hard lesson learned. I reversed that. I tried not to make the same mistake in my next startups, and I got radically different results. And I capture a lot of these lessons learned, again, in this book, Exit Path.
I love that. And sounds like a painful lesson learned, but valuable all in all. You talked a little bit about how you've had exposure to almost every corner of entrepreneurship, if not every corner of entrepreneurship. So can you just walk us through a little bit about how you got to where you are today through your career?
Happy to. Yes, sure. So, I'm an immigrant. My family came to the US in the 80s. I went to high school in Los Angeles. And then I went to Stanford as an undergrad. And that was my first exposure really to innovation, to the amazing, vibrant culture of the Bay Area. And I fell in love with entrepreneurship. But I don't have a technical background. I majored in philosophy and economics because I wanted to balance the practical and the impractical. You be the judge of which one is which. And then after, what would a philosophy major do but go to law school? So I went to law school after Stanford. I went to Yale Law, but I knew I wanted to be in Silicon Valley. So I came back with the intent to help entrepreneurs as a lawyer. I became a corporate lawyer and one of the prominent Silicon Valley law firms, Wilson Sonsini. But then as I started practicing law, I realized that my heart really was in business and entrepreneurship. So I quickly transitioned over and became an investor, a venture capitalist. Did that for a few years. We had another downturn. That's the bubble crash of 1999-2000. I got a little spooked. I felt that maybe I made a mistake. So I went back to law, practiced law again for 2 years, and that reconfirmed my initial escape. So this time I said, okay, I'm leaving for good. I had enough experience, courage, and I would say perhaps knowledge now to start my own company. And that's when I started Jackster. I've done a few other startups since. I've been an investor. I'm actually an operating advisor at a very prominent early stage fund called Pear VC. Some of your audience may be familiar with them, early investors in Gusto, DoorDash, etc. And then I have also spent 7 years on the acquirer side at GoDaddy. So I joined before the IPO because I wanted to see what's the IPO experience like. And then I became part of the corporate development, business development team, where we would be in charge of figuring out strategic acquisitions. Did a number of acquisitions spanning from hundreds of thousands to close to $1 billion in range. So diverse experience set there. Again, a lot of lessons learned through these experiences that I've captured in the book Exit Path. And then for the past year and a half, I have been, but I would say the most exciting venture I've been involved with, which is Serve Robotics, as its president and chief operating officer. And what we do is we build autonomous sidewalk robots that actually do deliveries. And right now we are doing deliveries in the LA area.
That's awesome. And yeah, the scars that entrepreneurship have given you, I'm sure have given you lots and lots of sleepless nights, but I'm sure you've learned a lot from it. So going back to the exits, are entrepreneurs who are focused on an exit mercenaries, or can they still be missionaries?
Oh, that's such a great question. Actually, something that I've thought a lot about and explored in detail in the book. I started by saying the definition of success, I think, should be about the mission. And for me, executing on that mission is always first and foremost. Now, there are a couple of myths out there or fallacies that kind of trips people up when it comes to exits. So I want to sort of demystify some of those. There's this fallacy that, look, if you're pursuing your mission, you shouldn't be thinking about selling your startup. Well, the reality is most startups don't make it. We all know that. And also the reality is that there are 30 times more exits through a strategic acquisition than there are IPOs. So when you put those numbers together, it seems that the most obvious route to success for any startup is actually through a strategic acquisition. And what is the best acquisition? It's one that carries your mission forward. It's one that helps you better achieve those missions, because a lot of times as startup entrepreneurs, we don't have the resources to fully achieve that mission. We need someone with deeper pockets, perhaps someone that has figured out a lot of the things that we couldn't get to with our limited resources as entrepreneurs. So at GoDaddy, for instance, we had figured out how to acquire customers profitably. It costs us very little to bring a new business through the funnel at GoDaddy because of the strong brand it has. Everyone, when they think of GoDaddy or think of buying a domain name, they think of GoDaddy, right? That association has been made over very smart marketing campaigns and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. Now, GoDaddy has achieved this position where they're getting these customers, but they didn't have the full suite of products and solutions to offer to these customers. So they were looking, my team, we were looking for products that we could plug in and bring into the fold so that we could put it in front of our customers. So a lot of the companies we acquired, achieved massive momentum because of that acquisition that they couldn't have possibly done. So strategic acquisitions make sense, and they are a way to get the entrepreneur closer to their mission, but it takes time for them to figure out who are the right acquirers, who are the people that can really help them achieve that mission. Now, sometimes it's not even an acquisition, it's a strategic partnership, it could be a joint venture, it could be co-marketing. But the point is this notion of a entrepreneur who's thinking about exit as a mercenary is actually a false notion, and we need to dispel that.
Yeah, and in terms of thinking about an exit as just a strategic option, sounds like you're doing a little bit of risk mitigation, but isn't risk mitigation contrary to the ethos of being an entrepreneur in the first place?
Yeah, well, again, actually great entrepreneurs are risk takers, but also they understand how to mitigate those risks. So risk avoidance and risk mitigation are two very different things. Entrepreneurs welcome risk, of course, but the smart ones really know how to mitigate those risks and kind of tilt the odds of success in their own favor. Otherwise, you'd just be gambling, right? If you didn't have agency in changing the risk profile, you'd just be gambling. But entrepreneurs are not gamblers. In fact, I mentioned a few stories of entrepreneurs who had, even before starting their first startup, Bill Gates, even Sarah Blakely, other very well-known entrepreneurs, they were like just dipping their toes a little bit. They didn't go full in. The founders of Warby Parker, they all had different jobs. And then until they saw that something is really taking off, then they built that conviction that they should go in full speed. Aaron Levy from Box, he had actually two different business plans he was executing simultaneously. And I can talk about it in the book. So that, just to hedge his risk. So savvy entrepreneurs hedge their risk, but in a smart way. One thing I found out as I was doing research for the book is this panic button effect phenomenon, which completely took me by surprise, but it makes a lot of sense. So they did these psychological studies where a group, the test subjects were taking a test, and they were playing really loud noises and distracting noises. So they were kind of inducing stress for one group. And they did the same to the other group, but this other group, they had a panic button that they could press, and it would stop the test, it would stop the noise. Those people who had the panic button, who had basically the exit option, performed a lot better, even if they didn't press the button, performed a lot better than those who were kind of in that stressful situation. So for me, exit planning actually gives you that peace of mind, that gives you that little edge to make entrepreneurship not even more likely to succeed, but even more pleasant to be an entrepreneur. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, your point on just having it as an option, even if it's not one that you're going to go after immediately, is just, I think it's just a great thing just to mitigate. Again, if any economic downturn that is unforeseen hits, like we're seeing right now.
If I may to just add one more point there, even if you're going for the IPO, and this is when I mentioned this to a lot of entrepreneurs, their eyes light up. Even if you're going for the IPO, if you have an acquirer or multiple acquirers at your IPO stage, your IPO will be a lot more successful because now you have a valuation benchmark. Now you have, you can dictate the terms of the IPO a lot better. So even in the very rare situation when you get to an IPO, you would be better off having gone through this exit planning.
Mm-hmm. Is there room for innovation, creativity, and outsized effort if a team feels that there's a soft landing ahead?
Yes, absolutely. I feel like risk and reward are very correlated. But if the entrepreneurs are not just innovating because they're facing a lot of risk and a lot of stress, they're innovating because they have the mind space and they have the ability to be creative. Again, it goes back to the mission. Entrepreneurs are not in it for, the real entrepreneurs are not in it for a quick buck. They're in it to make an impact. And just eliminating some of the risks make it more likely for them to have that impact.
Yeah. And there's various stakeholders involved through all of the processes in entrepreneurship. But how can you have an open and honest discussion about your exit plans with investors or even employees?
That's actually a problem, right? So there's this exit taboo, and I think you alluded to the fact that there is this mercenary versus missionary. We have all these hangups about risk and risk mitigation. A lot of investors, they're automatically turned off by someone that talks about their exit plans. And when I confront the investors about this and we talk about it, then they're like, oh my gosh, yes, I was completely, I was having a knee-jerk reaction to something I shouldn't be having. And that's because there's this signaling problem. Investors want the entrepreneur to be committed to their mission, and they wanted them to do all-out effort, move heaven and earth to get the thing done, right? And so when entrepreneurs talk to their investors and other leadership team members, etc., they need to contextualize the conversation of exit in the right way. If they jump the gun and they get too soon into it, there is that risk, there's that signaling problem that they may look like someone who is in it for a quick buck, even if they may be the most passionate entrepreneur ever. So my advice is, first, lay the ground rules. Make sure they understand you're committed to your mission. And then start thinking about, okay, if I truly want to achieve this mission, what are the risks in my way? And how can I de-risk some of those? And how can I best achieve that mission? I think if you systematically approach that conversation, you get a much different results than just putting a slide on your pitch deck and saying, this is my exit strategy. I would never recommend anyone do that.
Yeah, that's great advice. So these do come up from time to time, especially if you're on a company's growth trajectory like the one that you built. How should one deal with inbound expressions of acquisition interest? Somebody just hits you up and says, I'd like to purchase you.
Well, first of all, that is a great position to be in. So first, celebrate, perhaps not in there, not on Zoom or in the meeting, but when you come out, you give each other high fives. That's a fantastic milestone, that somebody else finds what you have built so valuable that they want to actually merge your storylines together. So that's fantastic. And then you kind of have to step back and evaluate, are you at a place that you are willing to entertain that seriously? For instance, with my second startup, Webs, we were in an enviable position to be cash flow break even, so we didn't have to sell. And then we had some of these acquisition interests, and we would tell folks, look, we are executing. We don't have to sell because we are, we have the funding to continue. But if you make us an offer that's compelling, it's on strategy, and it kind of stops us in our tracks, we'd be crazy not to look at it. Now, to be in that place, to have that kind of leverage, it takes time. You have to build a successful startup. That's why, building a successful startup and pursuing an exit are actually very similar things. You have to be careful also about how you engage in those conversations. So it's always helpful to have folks who have gone through this before, as advisors, as team members, so you can kind of avoid some of the pitfalls. And I mentioned a number of them in the book as starters, but of course, there's no substitute for experience, but at least become familiar with the landmines in the field.
Totally. And I know you go into this in more detail in the book, but as an entrepreneur, you've got to do due diligence on who's on the other side of the table just as much as they have to do due diligence on you.
100%.
So in terms of partnerships with potential acquirers, is that something to be cherished or feared?
Yes. Again, that I think if you structure it the right way, that could be so compelling and such success accelerants for you as a company to have a big strategic partner that's kind of pulling for you. One of the benefits of partnerships is that if you ever wanted to be acquired by that company, there's this period of courtship you needed, and a partnership is a wonderful way for both you to get to know them and them get to know you, because in any acquisition, the acquirer would want to have a lot of trust, confidence in your ability to execute, to be truthful. And so what better way than have a partnership through repeated interactions that you can prove that to them. I would say, business conversations are like an audit for your character. So you need to you get to show your true colors, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs benefit from that. Again, to your earlier point, you have to be careful. You have to be, you have to have the right legal structure for the partnership, the right frameworks, the right perhaps firewalls. Some of these bigger companies may be potential competitors, or they may acquire competitors. So you have to kind of have the right safeguards in place. But building that relationship is critical, and a partnership provides the opportunity very well.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's all about the relationship game. So you're already past that point with them. So it's solid advice. How about allowing potential acquirers to invest in the early stages?
Yeah, investment is another great way. It's like I would say it's another flavor of partnership, because now they not only have commercial interests in you, they actually have a fiduciary obligation to you as well, because an investor, they now have to watch out for you. So it's a more intimate relationship with a potential strategic acquirer. And an investment, the benefit of an investment is that it can also align your incentives. So your success also becomes their success. The person who made the decision to invest in you will look good when you're successful. So now you have people pulling for you on the other side. Again, you need to have the right investment sort of structure, the safeguards, protections for your trade secrets, confidential information. And there are very good lawyers out there that can advise you amply on that. But if you structure it the right way, again, fantastic. Welcome it, and don't be too paranoid to the detriment of the relationship. Always prioritize a relationship.
Yeah, and corporate venture capital deploys a ton of cash. So a lot of our companies that are raising in the ecosystem don't think of that as an option, but as you mentioned, it could be beneficial for so many different reasons.
Yeah, in fact, corporate venture capital sometimes sees opportunities before financial venture capitalists see that. I have seen that with a few startups where the interests of the corporate VCs were higher and prior to the interest of the financial VCs, because they are a little closer to the end customers. They kind of know they have the sense of the pulse of the market a little better than VCs who are a couple of steps removed.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that these deals, in addition to any B2B deal really in the startup world, take a long time because there's a lot of layers in the larger organizations. So how can a small startup gain leverage in negotiations with large, potentially public or even just larger companies?
Yes, that's the good news is that you can gain leverage, so it's not a lost cause. The bad news is that it takes a long time, and I would say if you really boil it down to its core components of what leverage is, it comes from three things: having options, being attractive, and being competent. So let me kind of go through each one of those. Having options, right? If you can we've all heard this, if you can walk out of a negotiation, then you kind of have the upper hand in that negotiation. I don't advise people to actually walk out. that would kill the relationship probably. But what you need to have is to have viable alternatives. You can't just bluff your way to options. You have to actually have the real options, viable alternatives. Now, those viable alternatives could come from other acquirers pursuing you or other people bidding for your partnership. It could also come from the fact that, as I mentioned with my second startup, you don't need to basically engage in a deal, right? If you don't have to, if you have the luxury of runway, etc., then that's another option. Or you could have even financial investors. So let's say one of our competitors at the Jackster times, they had just raised money from Sequoia when an acquirer came knocking on the door, and they basically didn't have to sell, and they got a very, very nice premium valuation, over $200 million for a company that probably had less than 10 million in revenues. Options, number one. Second, being attractive. So if the acquirer doesn't really want you, then you don't have much leverage, right? Because now they have the option to walk away. So you need to make sure you are as attractive to them as possible. And you get there by building that relationship over time, by making sure that you stand above the rest that they're looking at. And they probably are looking at everybody in your industry. So you want to make sure that you have the upper hand. They have seen your competence. They have seen your capabilities. They know, that you're attractive. It could be technology capabilities. It could be your go-to-market strategy. It could be just the way you're operating your business, right? And then lastly is competence. And here by competence, I'm talking about really the deal execution competence. You need to be able to execute a deal flawlessly. And that also means that your business keeps running smoothly when you are in deal negotiations and distracted. So you need to have the right leadership team that can handle and run the business when you and some of the other team members are distracted, because acquisitions take a lot of bandwidth from you, probably for 6 months to get a deal done. There's a lot of steps involved, not just the negotiations, but also due diligence, courtship, and with multiple parties, right? So you need to have that. You need to also have competent advisors who, like law firms, investment banks at some point, and other business advisors that can guide you competently so you don't fumble. Like using the wrong words sometimes can tank a deal. And I have a very beautiful story, another hard lesson learned in the book about how one founder in their negotiation with Steve Jobs used one wrong word, and that basically tanked the deal. So there are again things to be very cautious about. And you need to arm yourself with education and capabilities before you enter what I call the short game, which is the last 12 months of a transaction.
Well, I'm sure everyone else is curious, and I'm very curious on what the one word that killed the deal was.
It's in here.
There you go. So we've seen fluctuations in the markets, some high, some low. What justifies astronomical valuations for some startups, whereas some in the same industry or similar products go under or get bought for a fraction of that price? I mean, you saw that firsthand.
Exactly. So I saw that firsthand, and those other competitors of ours had created relationships which we did not, and they had options. So like that one with the $200 million plus acquisition, they had funding, they had options, they had leverage at the end of the day. And really leverage, what looks like luck in some of these deals is leverage in disguise. So if you build up your leverage, your valuation would automatically go up.
I love that. And I guess timing wise, and we're talking about exit strategies, when's the right time to sell one's startup, and what factors go into that decision?
Well, that's very, of course, individual decision, unique to every startup, but there are common themes, right? There are common themes that I have seen over and over again as to reasons entrepreneurs decide to sell their startup, and I've seen common reasons they decide against it. So some of the reasons they decide to sell, again, one could be better achievement of their mission. Another one is dilution avoidance. Like, for instance, if you are coming up against another round of fundraising, you may think to yourself that, look, if I raise another 40 million or 30 million and I get diluted by, I don't know, 50%, 40%, then my exit would have to be this much more for me to even make the same amount as I would do today if I sold my company, right? So some founders calculated that way. Sometimes it's even possible that if you sell for 100 million today, you'd be much better off financially than if you had sold for $1 billion, 2 years from now. Not just the time value of money, but also the dilution that you would incur in the intervening years, and also the risk, right? Don't ignore the fact that a war could break out any day, as we have seen, or a pandemic or whatnot, and it could, the future is not guaranteed. So those are some of the reasons I've seen entrepreneurs engage in a serious sale discussion. On the other side, there are risks. I mentioned distraction. A sale process can be very, seriously engaging, not just courtship, but actually seriously engaging in M&A is very distracting. If you can't afford the distraction, you have to think hard about that. It can also open your door to potential lawsuits. Sometimes I have seen not so great actors out there that as soon as they get whiff of companies in M&A conversations, they start basically throwing frivolous lawsuits at you because they know you would rather settle than to get the deal derailed. I unfortunately faced that with, again, my first startup too. There are the risks of leaks. If others, again, find out that you are in conversations to sell your company, there could be that your employees get demoralized, your key talents may leave, key customers may leave, key partners may leave. So there is a lot of risks involved. I go through these again in detail in the book, but these are some of the highlights of pros and cons. But at the end of the day, you want to sell your startup when you think you're a willing seller, there are willing buyers out there, and there's a set of terms that you think you can mutually agree on. So when those three ingredients come together, that's a great time to sell.
Awesome. And talking about starting the process, how do you start it and signal to potential buyers that you're willing to entertain offers? Like, what's the email look like, phone call?
Yes. Again, what I would hope that people take away from the book is that you can't just pick up a phone and call an acquirer and say, hey, we're interested in selling. Would you guys be interested? That you don't want to do that. What you want to do is build that relationship over time so that there is actually a natural transition from the steps you have taken together over many months or many years to saying, hey, look, looks like we are very much aligned in where we're going. We're going to need X, Y, and Z, and you guys have those, and you guys going to need A, B, and C, and we have those. Does it make sense to kind of be closer together? And that would be a much more natural conversation, especially if you have like an inbound interest, or if you are about to raise money. That is a beautiful time. I've actually had, it started acquisitions with companies when I was an acquirer, when they told me that, hey, look, we're about to raise money. Would you guys be interested in investing? And that conversation, sometimes if they were the kind of company that we wanted to acquire, we would turn around and say, hey, well, why would you want to get diluted? Just come and join us. So we'll have a lot more fun this way. So I talk about the process of Inception, borrowing from Christopher Nolan's movie by the same name, that I think is a lot more powerful. It's like an indirect approach rather than the direct approach, because a direct approach kind of feels a little bit off-putting. People, when you try to sell them something, they kind of put their guards up a bit. And if you're trying to sell your company, the risks are so high for an acquirer. In fact, inertia, I would say, pours buckets of cold ice water on any fever deal maker, because they have to convince so many people inside an organization to get a deal across the finish line that most acquirers would rather not do it. So it has to be a very thoughtful process. Another thing I would advise against is to hire bankers to generate interest for you. The same thing that you don't want to hire bankers to raise venture capital money for you. You don't want to go into you don't want the first interaction you have with a VC to be a banker sending your pitch deck to them. These are all relationship-driven transactions. So you want to establish the personal relationship first before you get a banker involved. And there's very good value that bankers add. So I'm not saying anything against them, but that they come later in the process, not for the initial relationship building. Once you have interest, then they can actually help you leverage that interest to the max and create an auction process and have structure and maybe offload some of the work from you.
I love that. Can you go into a little bit more detail of when you need and why you need a banker through the M&A process?
Yes. So, definitely you don't want them when you're just trying to establish a relationship. And the relationship could be with several different folks. And I would advise you to build those relationships with several different folks at each potential strategic partner for you. Could be in the corp dev team, also under, general leadership team, product teams. So you want to have a couple of different touch points. When you hire a banker is when those conversations have escalated enough that you actually have serious interest from one or more acquirers that are looking at your company. Now, with bankers too, you need to build those relationships. You need to kind of do your due diligence on them. So it's okay to talk to them and get on their radar, because they may actually have opportunities that they will bring to you, but you wouldn't officially hire them unless there is a transaction that is imminent, and then they are really a service role. They help you to maximize the value and the terms, help you negotiate the terms. And a lot of times you want someone to be in between you and an acquirer, because these negotiations can get a little tough. And you want to preserve the relationship, because there a lot of times founders continue working and your team continues working for the acquirer. Now you're part of a bigger organization. A lot of people you're negotiating with will be your bosses. So you want to preserve that relationship, and bankers can be that buffer in between, as well as lawyers. Lawyers for more the legal stuff, bankers for more the business terms.
Yep. And speaking of lawyers and bankers, who are some of the key players that, and the team that will support the M&A transaction?
Yes. So, of course, the CEO and the founders are always intimately involved. As you get more and more interest, more people will be pulled in, because the acquirer would want to understand and peek under the hood of your company. And usually they want to understand your technology, your marketing strategy, your finances, your HR. So leaders, those functional leaders will start getting sucked into the acquisition vortex. But my advice is to actually keep the deal teams as small as possible. Because again, the risk of leaks, I alluded to some of the dangers there. So the smaller the team is, the less chance of an accidental, not intentional, accidental leak. You still have a business to run. So when those people are distracted, there's more that can go wrong. And again, you don't want some catastrophic event or even your metrics to nosedive while you're in M&A discussions, because that you will lose a lot of leverage. There was one situation where when we were trying to buy a company, their metrics actually really took off because of some market dynamics put them in a place where they were very lucky, and we actually they told us they're not interested in selling anymore. So we had to up our offer significantly to get them back to the table. So you want to be in that situation if possible.
Yes. And speaking of walking away, when should one walk away from an acquisition offer? Is that a good idea? And are there repercussions if you do?
Yeah, well, if you do have alternative options, and this one option is not the best one, definitely walk away. I would not do it for posturing reasons. I would do it only if you truly do have viable alternatives. There are other reasons. Sometimes there's cultural compatibility issues. Sometimes you can't kind of see giving your baby to this entity. As a founder, our startups are our babies, so we are emotionally attached to them. But you also have to think about, in your fiduciary responsibility to your stakeholders, investors, employees, customers, what is the right thing to do? So it has to be a very considered judgment rather than an emotional reaction. But there are valid reasons to walk away. It's unique to every startup and entrepreneur and their core values and their core aspirations.
Oh my God.
I love that. And I'm sure we could speak all day, but we're almost at time and I want to get to Q&A. But what's the first step our entrepreneurs in our audience and those online should take now to plan their exit path?
I encourage everyone, regardless of the size of their startup and regardless of the stage of their startup, even if an exit is like 10 years down the road, to seriously think about their exit strategy and always kind of have the end in mind. Because once you start thinking about that ending, your brain starts thinking about ways to achieve it and then keep going back to it. I've found a tremendous power in just that one exercise alone. So that's where I would start.
Awesome advice. Touraj, this has been such a great conversation on the book, and I hope everybody in the audience wants to take a look at it and check it out. It's in the mail for me, but I haven't gotten it yet. I would be doing that right now. We know supply chain right now is tough, but we're going to jump into Q&A. Before we do so, I'm going to launch a quick poll just to inform us on what is keeping you up at night and our entrepreneurial audience out there. We use this data to help us understand what we should be putting up in the next couple months for you entrepreneurs in the future. Looks like finance is in the lead, but also scale, which is no surprise considering the topic that we're talking about today. So I'm going to end this poll. Thank you all for voting. Share those results. So a pretty good mix. But check that out. Touraj, finance on the exit path is definitely in the lead. So thank you all for sharing that. And we're going to do a lightning round because we have 9 minutes before we've got to go. But please submit those questions for us in the Q&A box. How do you factor in possible secondary sales by founders as opposed to a total exit? And I believe they mean secondary market.
Yes. Yeah. So that's an interesting one. So that's less of a sale of your startup, but more liquid, giving you some liquidity So a lot of founders were, a lot of us take very reduced salaries for many years, perhaps even no salaries in some cases, and we need some cash. we need to survive. So yes, you need to survive first before you can succeed. So I don't have any value judgment against it. I would say there are many valid reasons to. If there is a secondary market for the shares of your company, that if you want to take some money off the table, you should do that. The flip side of it is a signaling risk that people may start thinking that you're bailing ship rather than staying put, and so it depends on how much of your stake you're selling. But if you start selling significant stake, then people start wondering, why should they continue to invest in your startup? There's also dynamics with the team and other things that you have to think about. Who all gets to participate in that sale, and how do you manage that process? So it can become a tricky situation. But I have no value judgment against it. I think there are many places where that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think based on our discussion today, knowing your options is definitely something that I'm taking away from our conversation. Another question here. It sounds like there's a lot of attorney work behind the partnerships and, of course, the acquisitions that you're mentioning. How would you recommend to find and select a law firm to work with for a company at a pre-funding stage?
Yes. So the law firms that are really good at M&A tend to be the big, national global firms that are very expensive. Now, some of them have programs that perhaps sometimes with accelerators in conjunction with them, or incubators, or different programs that they have where they perhaps don't even get paid for the initial incorporation and kind of the setup until you have raised money. So I would encourage you to kind of talk to a few and inquire about those programs. Sometimes you may just go with a less maybe sophisticated law firm. There are also competent attorneys that could represent you in the initial phases, and at some point transition to a bigger firm as you grow and your needs grow.
Yeah, and I'm obviously biased because Wilson Sonsini supports the programs that we all get to use for free, but and you also used to work for them. But again, yeah, knowing talking to them, there's a lot of different creative ways that they work. That many different kinds of law firms work with pre-revenue companies. Let's see. Do you see interest for North America companies to acquire South American startups? And do you see this as an exit path, or is it not relevant?
Oh, definitely. At GoDaddy, we even acquired South African companies. So I don't think, especially post-COVID, there is no geographic boundaries anymore. So we live in a very global world, and I would not at all make geography a deterrent to your ambitions. So no matter where you are, build those relationships.
Love that. And I'm guessing, since I said good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, that we have several countries from all around the world on this call right now. And so we're all able to do this stuff on Zoom. So I think the way that we're all evaluating deals, investing in companies has changed thanks to 2020. Let's see, do you have any advice on the clean tech exit valuation conversation, given the number of SPACs and the available venture capital in the current market?
So SPACs used to be very hot last year. I don't think they are anymore, right? So, if you're building long-term value, these kind of fluctuations up and down shouldn't really concern you too much, unless you are in the final kind of short game, as I call it, for your business that you're trying to kind of sell. So if you're selling in the next 12 months, it's a tough market. Valuations are compressed, but I have seen in tough markets, people achieve extraordinary valuations. So it all comes down to your leverage, which we talked about. And, if you have multiple acquirers interested in you, no no one cares about what the market SPAC valuations are, right?
Yeah.
So focus on building your business and executing your own path.
That's great advice. Ooh, a question that is unfortunate, but I think would be valuable learning. Would you purchase, so when you were sitting in the corp dev side, would you purchase a company that has an outstanding lawsuit? Or what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think very few people want to, catch a falling knife, to put a visual to it. So a lot of folks would shy away from that. My advice, if you find yourself in that situation, is to get a legal opinion about the merits of that lawsuit and convince the acquirers that it's not a big deal, or try to settle. Again, this is the danger of leaks, because you do get these frivolous lawsuits during your M&A process, and they hurt like hell. So.
Yep. So yeah, tie it up. Oh, well, time has flown by, Touraj, and there's been so many great insights you've shared. If somebody was going to dial into the last 3 minutes of this talk, what's one takeaway that you want everybody in our audience to take away from the book and from this conversation today?
Okay, so companies don't do deals, people do. So always prioritize relationships, and no matter what you do, and you'll be a lot more successful for it.
That is great advice. Well, I'm looking forward to reading the book, and if you would like to take a look, we've been dropping links, but we'll drop another link to the book into the chat. But Touraj, thank you on behalf of everyone in attendance, everyone on our team. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation and for sharing your insights today.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the great questions. I'm available on LinkedIn and Twitter, and hope you guys get to benefit from some of these hard learnings in my book.
Well, your lessons learned are going to hopefully help save some pain and time and energy from the entrepreneurs in our community. So thank you so much, Touraj, and we're looking forward to staying in touch and to hearing what's next on your exit path.
Thank you.
For everyone still online, we have some great upcoming webinars, so you can view the upcoming events and the link in the chat. Also, we'd appreciate your feedback, so if you could fill out that survey in the chat box, we'd appreciate it as well. We'll use that information to develop the programs in the next coming months. But on behalf of everyone on the team, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you all back online with us soon. Have a good one, everyone.